everyone, here we are again for another fun-filled, I always get the video on and then realize how funny looking I am. Here we are ready for another fun-filled video for general anthropology. I'm hoping that this week we have much less difficulty with the technology. I don't know that that'll be true, but I'm hoping that this is all going to work just fine tonight and I can have them up for you before Monday morning as I usually do. Fingers crossed. This week we are talking about social stratification, and before we get started I just want to remind you that it is this week that your topics, not your topics, you did your topics already, that your articles are due for the literature review you'll be doing in this class. Now, I put a quite clear and detailed list of what types of sources are acceptable and what aren't for your literature review, but I just want to say here that I really expect you to go to the Wake Tech library to do a search in Find Articles within the library, for that search to have the word anthropology in it, so you come up with good, solid anthropological journal articles. Please don't make me have that day on Sunday where I look at my computer and I'm like, we have blogs and Newsweek and the New York Times and highlights for children. We want good peer-reviewed scholarly sources, and if you're not clear what that is, after reading through the assignment and the link I listed about how to understand what is and what isn't a peer-reviewed response, peer-reviewed journal, please send me an email so I can help clarify it even more for you. Okay, so back to social stratification. This week we're going to talk about class and ethnicity and race. We're particularly interested in the ways that human groups have unequal access to things like economic resources, which for the purposes of this video we're going to shorthand into money, power, and prestige. But we're going to start by talking about egalitarian societies. You'll remember from our discussion about band level societies, those groups are, the foraging groups that we've been talking about, are largely egalitarian. This means everybody in the group can pretty much do all of the jobs that are necessary to make the group function. This means that there's not a lot of status difference between one individual and another. Pretty much anything that anyone can do in that group, someone else can do as well. Certainly individuals have particular talents, right? But we don't have, for instance, like we have in the US, only some people grow the food and most of the rest of the people don't know how to grow the food. That's not the way it is. These are foraging groups, but everybody knows how to find the food. Okay, in these groups, the only status you really have is ability. If you're a particularly good hunter, you might be known for that, but that doesn't make you the boss. They're also very involved in sharing. This means whatever one individual has, they share with others. This means that no particular status is gained through greater control of economic resources. And these groups tend to have no permanent leaders, so no one is getting prestige through that process. Moving up from here, we're going to see rank societies, and we're more likely to see these in some tribal groups and in chiefdoms. In these, there is some unequal prestige or status, even though folks have largely the same access to economic resources, money, or power. We're seeing this largely in chiefdoms, and we find that the prestige or status that folks can have as, for instance, the chief is usually hereditary. So this is sort of an intermediate stage between an egalitarian society and the class societies that we're going to spend most of our time talking about this week. In a class society, you find that human groups are stratified, and each class has roughly equal amounts of prestige, power, and money. There's some movement within them, but not so much movement between them. Some of these societies are what we call open. This means that you could be born into one class and move into another class over time, and some are closed, like a caste system. These boundaries tend to be established by custom and tradition, along with how rigid and impermeable they are. Okay, so if you have classes that have unequal access to money and power and prestige, what you have is, of course, inequality. And when we look at our own society, we'll see that there is a great amount of inequality between people in the lower classes in our society and people in the highest classes in our society. The levels of inequality have been highest in our society. 1929, the stock market crash, 2007, the Great Recession, and of course now, where we see that inequality is rising and continuing to rise. We currently, go USA, lead the world in the amount of inequality between our richest citizens and our most poor. Okay, so that's an open system. You can be, for instance, born with nothing and end up with a whole bunch of money. We like to hang on to that myth in America, right? That you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and anybody could be president, like all those things. But in reality, folks who make it to the top of that ladder often started at least halfway up it, okay? Okay. This is different from a caste system. In a caste system, you are born into your specific caste, your assigned social group. At birth, you must marry within it, and you are supposed to perform the occupation assigned to that caste. There is no movement in between the castes. If you are born into the group known as untouchables, you may not marry out of it, live outside the areas associated with it, or perform jobs other than the jobs associated with that caste. We could think also of slavery as a caste system, right? We think of slavery as something that's totally gone. That is not true, not at all. Slavery, if somebody is born into whatever the group is that is assigned to be a slave in that society, then they are not generally able to move out of that group. So we could see it as another example of a closed or caste system. Okay, which leads us, of course, into racism. Race is one of the largest ways in the United States that we see inequality between social classes. We think of race as something that is biological, and I know we've talked about this a little bit already, but we're going to talk about it a little more. We see it as something that is biological, but that is not true. The groups that we see as races differ between countries. They have differed over time. We don't see race in the same way as we used to. And the groups that we think of as races have way more genetic variation inside of that group than we see between that group and another one. Indeed, the physical characteristics we think of as racial indicators, mostly skin tone, vary over the globe, associated with the amount of UV radiation each area got, and how much melanin we have in our skin to protect ourselves from that. And it varies in a cline, which means that if you're close to the equator, there's lots of dark skin, and as you move your way towards the poles, skin gets lighter and lighter and lighter as a gradual variation, a cline. So that is not anything that we can draw a clear line between one group and another and say we're going to put all the white people over there. Fascinating. I've always loved that particular term. This is the color that I am, for instance. And we're going to put all the people we see as black over there, even though they're not black, and we're going to say these two groups are totally and completely different. There is more variety between two absolutely identical looking penguins, more genetic variation, than there is between any two human beings on the globe, no matter how dissimilar they look. So race, not biological, but it is something that we use as a cultural indicator of class in the US. We use it as a social category. We organize people using that category, and folks have unequal access to power and prestige and money based on that class system. This is also true for ethnicity. Now, if we look, we often conflate race and ethnicity in the US. People think of ethnicity as a slightly more PC way to say race. I don't know what's up with that. Ethnicity is a group of folks who think of themselves as a group based on shared origin, language, or history. These things, again, all cultural. And race, when we really look at it, is really a form of ethnicity, except for the thing that we think those folks have in common is a supposed biological basis that doesn't exist. Okay, so ethnicity is another way that folks tend to organize folks into classes. We think of certain ethnicities as being higher on the class structure and some as lower on the class structure, and there are many countries around the world in which being born into a specific ethnicity means that you are either lower or higher on the hierarchical social order. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about before we leave this week is, when did stratification emerge? We're not really sure, but we think that it's likely that it emerged around the same time as we're seeing the development of agriculture and the start of cities. This is because both of those things were leading to surplus, and it's the existence of surplus that can have, that means that some folks are going to have unequal access to economic resources, to the power to move those surpluses around. We're also seeing specialization, right? In those band level societies, we saw that everybody could do everything. When you get to the point where certain people do certain things, some of those jobs are going to carry more prestige than others. So specialization is an issue. The development of money and moving away from redistribution and reciprocity as a way of organizing economic behavior is part of what led to social stratification. And the desire to control these resources is a big part of it too. Okay, so we're going to pack it up for tonight. Keep your fingers crossed that the video uploads without making me crazy. I would really appreciate that. And I will see all of y'all in the forum this week.